Thanks, Dr. Dapo. And maybe to begin with, could you give us a simple yet clear introduction to lubricant additives? Explain what makes additives production a unique type of operation, and of course, outline the key stages and considerations involved in producing high quality additives at scale.
That's an interesting way to start, actually. Lubricants, as we all know, are things that in most cases now, we're referring to liquid lubricants, oils that we put in between moving surfaces, basically to reduce friction, to reduce wear, of course, to reduce heat buildup, and in some cases, noise, and also to clean the engine. So there are a lot of functions that lubricants is expected to do. It's quite multifaceted, so it depends on your applications. So the liquid lubricants that we know are typically made up of the base stock and the chemical additives. The base stock come from either the crude oil refinery of the crude oil, where you get up all your naphtha, your kero, and then you do a vacuum distillation of the base to get your different kinds of base oils. So that's the base stock from crude oil, which we call the mineral base oils. And then there's other type of base stock, which is called the synthetic type, which comes basically from chemical plants. You're talking about synthesis and artificial, material from scratch. Because we're making them from scratch artificially, we are able to tailor make them to meet certain requirements that otherwise the mineral base stock may not meet. So we got the lubricants being made up of the base stock, which could be mineral or synthetic, and then we've got the chemical part of it, which we call the lubricant additives. Now, typically speaking, your base oil will be able to lubricate, but there are other properties, other demands, requirements of the lubricant that is necessary for proper functioning that the base stock would not be able to cope with, okay? So we then need to add these chemicals to enhance the property of the base stock so they can do certain functions depending on the application. I'll give you a typical example. For your gear oils, if you were to put an ordinary base stock in your gearbox, yes, it's going to lubricate, but it's going to cause a lot of macro pitting. It's going to cause a lot of friction, a lot of heat, a lot of noise in the gear system. But if you take off that ordinary base stock and add in a chemical called the EP additive, which is the predominant chemistry in the gear oil package, if you add it in that base stock and you run your gearbox with the gear oil now as it is, you'll see a whole lot of difference in terms of heat generation, in terms of friction, in terms of wear, in terms of micro pitting, macro pitting, a lot of those things that the base oils could not actually help because of the chemistry that is now added to it. The additive is able to do those functions. So your lubricants are made up typically of about 80%, 90% of the base stock, and about 20%, 10% of the additives to enhance the property, the functions of those base oils, depending again on your application. Now, because the base stock is a volume and it's that volume of the additive, of the lubricant itself, and the manufacturing of this has been on for a very long time. You've got our existing plants that make a lot of this base stock, mineral base stock, synthetic based stock, right? So it's a pretty much generic item in terms of the fact that there are not so many types of base oils. Compared to the additives now has so many different types, depending on your application. You've got your engine oils. Within your engine oil, you have your diesel engines, you have your petrol engines, you have your two-stroke, you have your marines, those are all engine oils, for example. And then you've got things like hydraulics, okay? Within the hydraulic system, you've got certain kind of systems that require certain kind of hydraulic applications. The same thing with your gear oils, the same thing with your ATF and the like. So there's so many different types of additives because there are so many different types of lubricants, because there are so many different types of machines and requirements for lubricants. So it's a lot of work, to make additives for lubricants. Not as much work as the base oil, because there are not so many types of base oils. But in terms of additives, there are way so many types of additives that you need to be able to make different types for specific applications.
So before we delve into African market, for additives, I think I remember there's a time we had very many additives. What is the difference now that we see packages? What is it? Because I think last I could remember we had one for iron, another one for this, and then now we have what we call packages. Maybe you could shed some light on that.
Traditionally, in the additive development, what we had was when you first had your vehicles being made, and then there was a need to introduce lubricants in those vehicles. We're talking about decades ago. The first thing that they saw was a problem was the fact that the base oils was not able to provide anti-friction properties. Okay, it was not able to prevent wear, which is generally what we want the additives to do in the beginning. And so the first set of additives that were developed were the ZDDPs, which were the anti-wear additives. And then over time, there was a need to reduce oxidation of the base oil. Then you had to develop the antioxidants. Over time, we realized that it wasn't just the heat that was causing degradation, there was also the introduction of active radicals like the sulfur radicals. So we had to develop what we call detergents and base neutralizers to help reduce the effect of these, acid radicals. So as time went on, development went on, we are developing more and more different kinds of chemistry to the point where if you're now developing your engine oil, for example, rather than buy only the ZDDP, you now have to buy a package. And then specifications came on. And this became about the API specification, the ACR specification, where they now said, look, the oil must meet certain requirements. And in meeting those requirements, you have to do tests for wear, you have to do tests for oxidation, you have to do tests for detergency, and all of those tests became a package to say this additive meet this package, these test requirements. And so the concept of additive packages came into existence. So now we have them as components or as packages. So that's how additive packages came into being. And then, like you said, there's so many different types. Again, if you pick an example of an additive, say engine oils, for example, you would realize that the engine that we're using in 1970 is not the engine we're using in 1980, not what we're using in 1990, and so on. So there's always development, improvement in the technology. And with that comes with that is also the requirement of the lubricant itself. So, for example, if you had an oil that was supposed to work with the car that was made in 1970, the environmental requirements of the oil at that time is not the same as now. So in terms of emission of the SAPs, the SAPs, and soot and the likes, requirement of an oil in 1970 is not the same of an oil in 2025. So if you are going to have to develop a lubricant that will work in 2025, obviously it's going to have a different chemistry, than what was available in 1970. So there are so many different types of cars, engines, requirements because of technology, because of the environmental, the sustainability angle. So there's a lot of talk about emissions, emission control. So this also affects the development of the engines as well as development of the additives, of course, the lubricant itself. So that's why you have so many different types of additives and lubricants.
Nice. So let's just talk a bit on Africa. From your experience, which additive types or packages are most commonly used across African markets?
Interesting question as well. The answer may seem a little bit obvious because in Africa, the most requirements that we have would be the automotive, sector. Mainly because in terms of industrialization, we have actually lagged behind. So you find that what we have more is lubricants for automotives. The passenger car, the PCMO, and of course the HDDO, which is commercial. In Africa, we do a lot of trucking, because the rail infrastructure is not so fantastic. The waterways is not so developed in terms of as a mode of transportation. So we spend a lot of time on the road. So a lot of lubricants are used for automotive. That's the number one. As a matter of fact, almost 60% of lubricants used in Africa are in the automotive sector.
Awesome. And since you're talking about automotive, there are these other sectors. So how do additive needs differ across these sectors? That's automotive, industrial, off-highway, power generation, aviation, and so forth.
It's really a function of the application. We have other sectors like off-highway. Off-highway would be mining, equipment for those big ones. Those are off-highway. Industrial will be, hydraulics, for cranes. And so the application is, would tell you the different chemistry that is required. In an engine oil, for example, you have to contend with a lot of oxidation. You have to contend with a lot of the need to clean the engine, the soot buildup. Okay, you don't have so much of that in an hydraulic system, for example. In an hydraulic system, you are talking more of the oxidation and the wear, and that's basically what you're looking at. And of course, the mobility, because water will be introduced in the system one or the other as the oil is breathing and going around the engine. So those are the things you consider in an hydraulic system. But in an engine, for example, you have a lot more to consider in an engine. So those are things that inform the differences actually in the additives. So it's about the application where the lubricant is going into. A lubricant going into the gearbox, for example, has no business with the detergents because it's not going to interact with the fuel. You need a detergent to be able to clean the engine or to also to retard the activities of the radicals that is going to be brought in by the fuel. In the case of the gearbox, there is no fuel introduction, so you don't need a detergency package to, or so much of an antioxidant in that light to attack the radicals that will come from the fuels.
So if you look at Africa's operating conditions, we present a very unique environment. We have areas of high temperature, very dusty off-road conditions, inconsistent fuel quality, which is a problem across Africa. So how do you tailor additive technology to address these realities?
Okay, this is something that actually makes us stand out in Adipro. I know this is not a sales pitch, but
Good.
one of the things that make us stand out as a company in Africa specifically is the fact that we are probably, if there is any at all, one of the few additive manufacturers, formulators that formulate additives for the African, continent. Most of the formulators are making additives as a standardized product for Europe, the US, and Asia and the likes. We don't have additive manufacturing of companies and formulators making additives with Africa in mind, and that's where we actually stand out as a company in Adipro. And it's fantastic. You said, you mentioned some of these challenges that we face in Africa, the temperature, the fuel, and even the base oils. So we've got very inconsistent standards when it comes to base oils in Africa. Now, for us, because we have a unit in Nigeria, an R&D center, which we call the Adipro Africa Technology Center, AATC, we are able to work with the field that we have in Africa for all our trials and all our testing. So when we take our package, if we're making an SL package for Africa, for example, we will blend the oil with the Africa-based oils in Africa. We will run the test in conditions that are identical to what we have in Africa, especially when it comes to the area of fuels. We are not in the ultra-low fuel area yet. So most of our fuel have high sulfur. So our testing is done with that in mind. You talked about, there's one thing too that I need to say. A lot of the vehicles that are in Africa are not brand new. There are vehicles that have already been used before being shipped to Africa. So the engine is coming in with a lot of wear to begin with. And you find that traditionally, a lot of the additives in the market today do not consider that for African market. When you're buying an additive, the manufacturer is assuming that those API-rated additives were made for brand new engines because they are tested with brand new engines. What we do that is strikingly different from a lot of other manufacturers of additives in Africa is that we do a lot of field trials. we simulate real life experiences of the driver when we are doing our development. So when we make an additive, we know that we're going to use that additive in an environment with a lot of high sulfur, in an environment that is very dusty, in an environment where the engine is not brand new, so there's existing wear and tear and fatigue in the engine. So when we do our own formulation, we have that in mind, which takes us to things that we do differently in terms of the chemistry. You've got different types of, for example, anti-wear chemistry, like the ZDDP. We've got the primary, secondary ZDDPs. We've got the mixed ZDDPs and other types of technology. Now, it's not just for us okay to use a particular ZDDP that works and meets the spec. No, we know that our users in Africa are going to require something a bit more than the basic requirement. Otherwise, they're going to have problems because their cars are already used. We've got cars that have spent 10 years before it was shipped down to Africa to be bought as used cars. So we have that consideration to use the best form of anti-wear. We also pose in consideration that if that fact before developing or deciding to use the type of antioxidants that we're going to put in our formulation. Okay, so we specifically look at the operating condition of the engine. Of course, with Africa as a market for the development of the product for that market. We do, and what that really means is that if we come up with a product, an API product, it means that our product usually exceeds the minimum requirements of the API to be able to do more arduous work than what you find in the market.
Nice. Thanks so much. I think it's so could you have an example of maybe something that you developed that you had to solve a problem in the African context? Yeah. So these are unique product that we've developed specifically because we found this problem and this is how we've solved it.
There are quite a few actually, like I said, we have a research center in Nigeria. And I'll give a very specific example. It's the API SL CF package that we have for the PCMO. Okay. Most of the package for API SL PCMO you have in the market right now were developed for just that API SL for your PCMO. We've come to see that because the engines, like I said, are coming in used, are coming in worn, there's a lot of wear in the engine. Our R&D chemists and engineers have, our tribologists really, they've come up to say, look, we need to enhance the anti-friction properties of our additive. We need to improve the anti-wear properties of our additive because they're going to face a lot of challenge in the existing engine, in the one engine. So we typically in our package will have a little bit of moly. Molybdenum disulfide is it's a very good it's very good for for improving your anti-wear and improving your anti-friction properties of the oil. So you find a lot of PCMO packages not having that moly in them, except they are now developing it for Daso MB, what's called four-stroke engines. But in our case, we had to add the moly to improve the anti-wear properties of the oil. So our API, our GA7164 SL package, which is actually made for Africa, meets the API requirement of the SL, but exceeds it in terms of the anti-wear properties because we know that the cars are going to use those oils are going to be used already. They're not going to be brand new cars, which the traditional SL package was made for.
Thank you. Thank you. So in terms of, we have a problem with varying quality fuels for our engine in Africa. We have low quality fuel sometimes. Sometimes even when you test, you find the quality of fuel is not okay. How do additives help mitigate the impact of this?
Interesting question, because in the beginning I'd mentioned something about sulfur in fuels that we have, here, and also the amount of carbon in the fuels that we use. Africa is very inconsistent. Okay, so if you're using a high sulfur fuel today in your engine, it means that you're going to have a lot of sulfur radical, more sulfur radical, active radicals in your oils when the oil is when it's operational. Okay, when it heats up, the sulfur becomes active, and this can actually attack the metal parts of your engine. It then means that if you're developing an oil, even though the API says your TBN in that oil should be maybe 7 for an SL package, I know that's fine. If you consider the fact that in Africa, we're going to use a high sulfur product, you're going to want to increase your TBN to maybe 8.5 to, of course, compensate for the additional acidity in your fuel compared to what you have outside of Africa. So the additive that you use for your lubricant is actually very critical. Another thing to worry about is that we worried about and keep up with the solution is the culture of maintenance that you have in Africa. Generally speaking, a lot of cars that are bought outside of Africa are bought, with the mortgage kind of system where you pay and then it's not yours until you finish paying. So it means that the maintenance is followed to the letter. Okay, the users must maintain as a when due. There's no compromise, because if there's any issue, you might lose your warranty, you might lose any of your agreements when you're buying the car. So they do follow these things. But in Africa, you find that is a totally different concept. Again, also comes from the fact that when you buy a brand new car for $30,000, for example, you're more concerned about the maintenance because you want to keep it because you know the value of the car. But if you buy a 10-year old car for $5,000, it's not as valuable to you. And so you might also, maybe that's the reason for what, this culture that we have of not changing the oil when it's due to be. And then, of course, economic reasons will also play in. You want to stretch as much as you can. Now, if you know that your users are going to stretch the car, the maintenance or draining interval from maybe 7,000 to about 9,000, if you want to serve them well, you have to put that in consideration when you're developing your additive package. You have to put in an extra antioxidant, knowing that this is going to be stretched. Okay, if you're going to use a multi-grade, you don't want to use a high SSI polymer because you know it's going to shear fast and your users are going to stretch the oil for a long time. So you want to use a very stable, polymer that's going to withstand that extended drain interval. So those are there are quite a lot of them that we put into consideration: the antioxidant, the amount of TBN, the level of the type and level of dispersants that we put as well. Like you said, there's a lot of contamination in the air here, a lot of dust in the air when it comes to additive and lubricant uses in Africa. So we also consider that, look, you might need to have a little bit more dispersants, in the oil, and you might want to have an oil that is not going to be susceptible to a lot of degradation because it's going to be stretched. So we look at the antioxidants, we look at the the neutralizers, we look at the detergents, we look at a lot of parameters based on the African context to design those packages. Again, Africa is maturing to the point where we are now having organizations, companies like Adipro who are able to do this. Prior to now, to Adipro being a local manufacturer of additives for Africa, the manufacturers of additives just didn't really care about this. It was not their problem. They were moving on to the newest API requirements. They've designed their SL, they use it for the old cars. Now there are newer cars, there are new requirements, they move on to the new requirements, the SP, SQ. Meanwhile, here at home in Africa, we're still using the cars that require the SL. And nobody is really thinking about how to develop a package that will meet the requirements of the SL as at now. The obvious requirements are not being considered and is not catered for. We perhaps are one of the very few, again, perhaps the only additive manufacturer that designs the package based on those considerations. So we've had a lot of success. I mean, we did the same thing in India, and then we thought, look, if you're going to develop a package for the Indian market, and then we have facilities in Nigeria, Why not do the same thing for Africa? Why not look at the Africa-based oils, the African fuels, the African, maintenance culture, see how we can improve the packages to make these oils last longer, to reduce breakdown because of lubrication in these engines. And that's what we've been doing for the past decade.
What one problem would you want an additive manufacturer or your additive manufacturer to solve? So these are problems that has been persistent and maybe you'd want them to solve. So it will be nice to hear from the expert really how they would solve that kind of problem. Yeah, one of the result is, of course, is oxidation problem. The other one is reliable access to quality and consistent additive packages at competitive cost. I think we'll be looking at that in the next section. And to enhance my base oil performance. And I think that, Dr. Dapo, I think resonates so much with, let me see, resonates so much with what we were talking about as the functions of additives. Now, maybe you could give us in a snapshot, one of the responses was oxidation problem. The other one is reliability. Of course, we'll look at that in the next section about supply chain. And then the other one is how to enhance the performance of our base oils. So those two, maybe you could shed some light on how maybe you could help or the additive manufacturer could address that.
Okay, so when we're designing an additive package, oxidation is very critical. Actually, it's something that we have to balance, right? So it's a balance of chemistries in the package. Now, there are different types of antioxidants. We've got the phenolic antioxidants, we've got the aminic antioxidants, we've got different types of antioxidants in the market right now. And sometimes you can use both. You can use two antioxidants together. You can use one type. So like I said before, if you were designing a package for an older vehicle and the requirements of the API was a certain level of antioxidation, there are certain tests that you can run. You can actually design an additive with a better oxidation performance using maybe two antioxidants or specific type of antioxidants. Also, be aware that your neutralizers also tend to have some level of antioxidation, as well as your anti-wear. So it's really a combination and a balancing act of your antioxidant that you have and the antagonistic effect of your dispersant on the antioxidant. So formulating the additive is actually a bit more, how do I put it, technical, because you have to try and balance it. So if you say you want better antioxidant activity, it's achievable, but it also has a certain level that you can take it to. Because when you have a lot of antioxidants, it gets to a point where you might have to have certain difficulties with the other packages as well. So you have to balance your ZDDP, your detergents, and the maybe phenolic or aminic antioxidants that you want to use, or both. You have to balance all of them. You have to combine, you have to test for interaction, for stability, and then the antioxidation that you actually want it to perform. Okay, and so don't also forget that the oxidation itself in the lubricant comes from not just heat, but also from pollutants, and certain, parts of the base oils and the fuels, like the sulfur, for example, those will cause oxidation. Heat will cause oxidation, And so you really want to, the question is, what level of antioxidation are you looking at? But if you're looking at just improving what you have, then perhaps you might want to look at who your provider of additives are, so that you could ask for a better performing and package from them. I hope I made that a bit clear.
Yeah, I think that's super. And I think maybe we'll share also your email address in the chat for anyone who would want more discussion and further queries. So let's look at our current market and the environment we are in Africa, we have several challenges. We have challenges of regulatory hurdles, yeah? Supply chain, logistics. You are in Nigeria, you produce in Nigeria, somebody else in Tanzania, somebody is in South Africa. And then there is a big concern really of currency fluctuations. These three things are very hard: regulatory, supply chain, and currency fluctuations. How does Adipro navigate these challenges to enable us as the end users of your products really get the products at the optimal value? And this again, look it with the lens also with one of the responses about costs. Yeah.
Yeah, great one. That's a good question actually, because a challenge that we face in Africa is the fact that we don't have a unified standard system. Kenya has its own KEBS, Egypt has its own, Nigeria has its own SOM, South Africa has its own, East Africa has it as a collection of countries have their own. So we don't have a unique or unified requirement, but there are some commonalities, which is that a lot of times all of us refer to ACR and API. So as additive manufacturers, we work with what is common to everyone. And then, like I said before, we try to make it slightly better than the basic requirement. So if you are making an API SF, for example, we don't stop at SF. We make it a fortified SF so that it can actually work across all countries, because we cannot just meet or make a product only for KEBS, and then we're looking at SON, trying to make a different product for SON. We have an overview of all of the requirements, and we see that a lot of times they refer to SON. Sorry, to API and ASEA, which is a common standard that most of us in Africa refer to. So we work to exceeding those requirements, knowing that once we meet those requirements, we automatically have met the requirements of many of these standards across Africa. So that's what we do as Adipro, is to exceed the basic requirements of the API and ASEA. Okay, so in terms of regulation, we are also very active in a lot of the countries that we are present in. So we try a lot of time to get ourselves involved with what is happening in those countries in terms of regulation. So when there are regulatory meetings, we do have our distributors and our technical guys participating in those meetings so that we are abreast with what's happening there. For example, in Kenya has moved from API CF to a minimum of API CH4. Tanzania is also saying the same thing, but has not put that into law, unlike Kenya that has already stopped all of the CF. So we are aware of this. We saw it coming. We knew it was going to happen. And of course, we had to prepare ourselves and develop a package that was going to meet and exceed the requirements of the CH4 for, knowing that Kenya is going to do it, and Tanzania will soon follow suit. And so that's how we, from our own side, address the issue of regulation. It's a challenge because there's no common regulation for the whole of Africa. But we see that many of the standards have a common reference, which is the API, and of course the ASEA as well. So in terms of supply chain, one of the success factors we've had is the economics of it all when you make products locally. Okay, the design of the product is done by Adipro. So even though the design is done in India and Nigeria together, for the Nigerian market and some African countries that we play in, we look at, okay, we are trying to achieve this, and what should be the cost benefit and analysis advantage, the benefits of doing it locally. So those are considerations that we are able to make because we make the product. In our case, the package is done at our factory in Nigeria, but the components are actually still brought in from India, which is where we make our components from. But because we make the component and we understand that we want to impact, have a strong impact on the cost of the finished product, we do not charge ourselves, unlike going to buy components. We just see it as a transfer of the components at cost from India to Nigeria, and then we do the packaging and the testing. And I mean packaging, we do the blending and the testing of the components based on the existing formulation that has already been tested and proven. So that, to a large extent, is able to reduce the cost, because the cost is spread not just between Africa and India now, but also globally, because we use the same formulation across the globe. Remember, I said we are only making sure that the formulation exceeds requirements, so it's applicable everywhere in the world. So we're able to spread the cost of technology, formulation across. So that really reduces the cost of the product. And then, because if we didn't do that, we'll be forced to move the cost of development only to Africa. But because we are also spread globally, we can spread that cost as well. And that has really, really helped Africa as a country, as a continent, sorry, to reduce costs. So in terms of economics, we are very, very focused on that. And currency, for example, I've had clients who are in West Africa who have access to the Nigeria's local currency. Okay, maybe there's some form of trade that they're doing and they have access to their local currency in Nigeria. They've been able to pay us in the local currency. Okay, so in that regard, the dependence on the foreign currency, which is US dollars, has reduced for them. Okay, so we have those kind of discussions with our clients globally as well to see how best we can work. And also remember that there's an ETLS program, the free trade in Africa, where you don't have to pay duty if you're moving across the ECOWAS regions. That's a huge cost saving for the clients. We've got the AFTA agreement, although that hasn't been very well implemented so far. But we are hopeful that that implementation will also be done, and it will also reduce the costs. Again, freight costs is also an advantage. If I'm moving products from Lagos to Ghana, for example, it's so different from moving products from India to Ghana. So there's also an advantage when it comes to freight. So the advantages are really numerous. They're innumerable. You can't really count them when you start to itemize them one by one. It's just the right thing to do.
So now let me give you some time. Just introduce Adipro. Who is Adipro? You have facilities in India, in Nigeria, and how does this presence strengthen your service, and what does it differentiate you from as a global leader in additive manufacturing? Maybe you could take us through that. Just tell us who Adipro are.
Can I quickly share one or two slides just to show
Yes,
you?
You can go on.
So
Great.
Adipro International actually is an additive manufacturing company, and we do the manufacturing from the components up to the package. So if you're talking about ZDDP, for example, you're not buying ZDDP to make into a package. You're making the ZDDP by ourselves from the zinc oxide ore. Okay, if you're talking about the calcium sulfonate or the magnesium sulfonate, we are making the magnesium sulfonate from the ore ourselves, from ground zero up to the finished package. So we are a fully integrated additive manufacturing company based in India. Our component factories are in India, as well as the R&D center. Our main R&D center is in India. So from there, we do the development, we do a lot of the testing. Now, the testing we do it in partnership with Intertech and SWRI. SWRI is in the US, and then Savant Labs as well. Those are, API approved laboratories for engine tests. So we work with those laboratories to prove our additives performance.
Dr. Dabu, I think maybe take your slides are not moving, eh?
Yes. So can you see now? Can you see? So
yes,
can you see?
now we can. Now you can see, yeah.
So we've got the Adipro India, which is where the factory is. And then the other office is Adipro, Nigeria, where we have our second factory. The second factory is really to serve the African market. So right now from Nigeria, we are moving products to Ghana, to South Africa, to Egypt. And so that's the whole essence of having a local blending facility in Africa, to be closer to the African market. So we've got office in the US, Adipro US. We've got office in UK, in Netherlands. We've got an office in Oxford as well, in the UK. And we've got an office in Adipro in Hong Kong, which is, we call it the Adipro Hong Kong. So that's really how we were spread. And we've got distributors everywhere. We've got distributors in Egypt, in Turkey, in Singapore, Indonesia, South Africa, and Brazil. Like I said before, we are component manufacturers. So we make most of our components in India with a capacity of 60,000 metric tons. For the OCPs, the polymers, of course, this is gotten from refinery allocation. So we have a technical partner in Singapore and also in Korea where we make the OCPs for our use and, of course, for our clients. In terms of the packages, our major factory is in India with a capacity of 55 metric tons. And of course, Nigeria is next in line with a 30 metric ton. Now, these two are owned by Adipro. We then have toll blending arrangements with other factories in UAE and China because they make products with our own formulation on toll blending. So it's not really like we're buying products from them. They're actually making our products in those locations. And the reason we do a lot in the UAE is because we have certain customers in the Gulf area who prefer to, for logistics reasons, prefer to buy from the Gulf area. So we blend in the UAE and we can serve Saudi Arabia, UAE, even Pakistan from there. Some of our customers are Total Energies, Castro, Fuchs, Oryx, Ola, and too many other companies. One thing that makes us really stand out is, like I said, we are moving closer to our clients in Africa, in India, in the US. Our vision is to be able to make additives as close as possible to our clients for many obvious reasons we talked about. One of the benefits we enjoy with our clients in West Africa is the ETLS, for example, which I spoke about earlier. So if you happen to be in the West African zone or even any part of Africa, there's an after agreement that allows us to be able to ship to you with very minimal duty, if at all. And then as a company, as a global company, we are very big on sustainability. That's very crucial. There's nothing we do without sustainability. As a matter of fact, the local manufacturing initiative that we have started with the need to have a more sustainable organization to reduce emission from transportation, okay, from material movement from far away countries. So the whole idea was to reduce our sustainability, our emission, and improve our sustainability. So that's who we are in a nutshell. We are spread across the world. We've got a facility, an R&D center, and a factory in Nigeria tailored to service the African market. We've got an R&D center in India. We've got partners in the US for testing of products. And our capacity is really huge. And like I said, the whole idea is get closer to the customer, meet the customer's requirements, and be able to service them. Thank you.
Wow, I think that's a really nice overview of Adipro. So I think one of the key central things on your brand, which I've seen, is basically innovation and sustainability. So how are these values reflected in your current product development and long-term strategy?
Oh, interesting. Good question. Thank you for this. First thing is development of our additive packages is made with the sustainability in mind. So we are looking at the closest source of raw material to the plant. We're looking at how to develop products that will meet sustainability requirements of some of the countries where we work, where we operate. For example, I'll give a good example. RLDO, we refine based oil, is now a focus in many countries. A lot of countries want to use the refined base oil, of course, for sustainability purposes. A lot of the additive packages that we have in the market right now are not particularly compatible with the RLBO. There's separation. Okay, so we are developing additives that are very compatible with the RLBO. So that even when you use some RLBO in your lubricant formulation, the additive that you get from Adipro would work and serve that purpose. So that's one of the things that we're doing in terms of sustainability. Again, we have so many initiatives in Adipro that we're doing right now. One of them is the tree planting exercise, where we have allotted ourselves a certain portion of land and we are planting trees to sort of pay back in terms of the carbon, payback of carbon for because we have a target of a sustainability target. Another thing we're doing is we're doing the Girls Education Initiative in Nigeria, especially, which is basically us sending girls to school by giving them all the school supplies that they need, the uniforms, the books, the bags, the shoes. We've given thousands of children in the last couple of years. The whole idea is that when you're able to keep a woman in school, keep a girl in school, it's going to impact on your sustainability on emission, because most girls who have gone to school can be thought about sustainability. They can use cleaner fuels rather than going to just burn trees and firewood and all of that. So they can be more sustainability oriented, can teach them in school. So, and then of course they are the starters of the home and upkeepers of the house. So their impact is very, very important. So those are one of the things that we are doing right now. Quite a lot of programs actually to ensure that our sustainability drive is achieved, because we have a 2030 zero net emission target that we are trying to achieve. So there are quite a lot. If you please watch out for news on our website. We're always posting sustainability initiatives on the website. Please go to adiprochemicals.com. You will see a lot of information about our sustainability initiatives there.
Maybe in the last question, maybe I could ask is like when you're looking ahead in our outlook, yeah. So what role does Adipro envision playing in shaping Africa's lubrication and additive landscape over the next decade?
Being the first local manufacturer of additives in Africa, there's a vision that we had that we were able to bring to light. And we're not stopping there. We are looking at other areas. We've started in Nigeria. We hope to be able to replicate what we have in Nigeria in South Africa. We hope to be able to replicate what we have in South Africa in Egypt. So there's a roadmap, and this is not the end goal for us. This is just the beginning. So in a couple of years, you're going to see many more factories by Adipro making lubricants and servicing Africa. Right now, we are the only factory that makes additives that is able to ship to Africa. And because of the AFTA agreement, because of the ETLS agreement, this is a huge opportunity to get tailor-made additives that meet our own specific requirements in Africa at good prices and with reduced emissions, which is a huge one. So that's one of the visions that we have, is local manufacturing of products within Africa. The second vision that we have, really, which we want to pioneer, is having a unified standard within Africa, understanding the African market, what our requirements are, and being able to have one voice, as it were, that manufacturers and suppliers into Africa will be forced to meet those requirements, to suit us better. So we want to pioneer that, because we already have the facility to make the product in Africa to begin with, but we want to have a unified, a standard, unified voice, as it were, as far as additives are concerned.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think I'll hand it over to Peace if there is a question in the Q&A. I think we'll just have one question, then we can close because of time.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. James and Dr. Dapo. We have a question from one of us, and I'll read. As local blending increases across Africa, what innovations in additive concentration, multifunctional additives, or treat rate optimization are helping blenders manage costs while still meeting OEM performance and sustainability expectations?
Yeah, this question is like a sales pitch for Adipro because in the whole of the additives that you have in Africa, for example, we have the lowest treat rate packages. I'll give you an example. Our gear oil package is a 3.9% GL5 package. What you have in the market is 4.2, 4.5 package. This was done intentionally to help our blenders reduce costs. Another example I give to you is our UTTO. We have a JD20D UTTO package that is 3.6%. The closest you have in the market is 6%. Our SLTF package is a 5.35% treat rate package. The next one you have in the market is 6.2, 6.5. Okay, so our packages are actually designed with low treat rate because the truth is we have looked at the market, we looked at optimization, and like I said, I don't know if I should say this, but it's like kind of like a trade secret where we use modern chemistries to satisfy old requirements. So rather than having to use old type chemistries for the old APIs, we're using the newer antioxidants, using the newer ZDDPs, we're using the newer detergent dispersants to make products that meet the old technologies. So by itself, our product automatically exceeds the requirements of the old technologies. I just gave out one of our trade secrets. But these are some, so we can use new technologies to drive down the treat rates of additive, which is what we've exceeded in doing.
Okay,
Awesome.
thank
I
you so
think,
much.
yeah.
Over to you, Dr. Jim.
Okay, thanks, Peace, for that. And I think today it's really been an interesting journey, this conversation on how we are able to get additives first in Africa. Secondly, additives that are contextualized, meeting what we require in Africa. And I think we also seen how Adipro basically is trying to navigate in the various challenges that are there to help the African continent get the additives in a good, cost-effective, and even good quality products. And the one thing that I've loved is I think we cannot run away from sustainability, where we have the re-refined base oils, which are basically coming from other countries, and even there are plants right now doing re-refining, so we can be able to get additives that can also be used for those kind of base oils from Adipro. Maybe I'll give you 1 minute for your final remarks, Dr. Dapo.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure doing this. It's been really exciting. I get passionate when it comes to manufacturing in Africa because as an African, I understand the importance of having our manufacturing sector developed in Africa. One of the reasons why Africa remains where it is today is because we have not invested enough in manufacturing. So any opportunity to increase manufacturing is going to increase employment, it's going to help improve the economy, buying power of people, less crimes. There's so many advantages of having manufacturing in Africa. So anything, whether lubricants or any sector, I'm always passionate about it. And to the listeners, our audience, I think we should also begin to think about how we improve Africa with manufacturing. I mean, there's no other way. We have to reduce our dependence on importation and the need for foreign currency. Africa for Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Africa for Africa. I think that's a good parting shot. And I would want to thank everyone who has joined in. And I want to remind you, next month, we have another webinar or another conversation. This time we'll be talking about industrial heavy machinery lubrication, of course. Come to the mining, come to the cement, come to the sugar industry. We'll be having a company from Brazil that will be speaking to us through that. So look out for the next webinar. We will be sharing it in our social media. And for the people who registered today, we'll closely send you also the same to your emails. So for now, I think I want to thank you, Dr. Keshniro, for this very in-depth clarity and practical insights that you've shared with us today. I think this conversation has highlighted not only the complexity of additive technology, but also the immense potential that lies in tailoring solutions in Africa's unique operating conditions. Thanks also for the team behind the scene, that's Lubezine, led by Peace, who were also able to bring this to speed and curate everything. And want to thank you, Dr. Keshniro, and also pass our regards to the larger Adipro family. And I'm sure we'll be still coming back to you. I'm sure it's going to really elicit quite a bit of interest in the whole of the conversation. And I'm sure we'll be having you back or somebody from Adipro soon again. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
So thank you very much and adios for all of us and see you in the next session in February.